Right. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for turning up today on this pretty miserable Saturday evening. What a fantastic week. And today's talk I've been looking forward to just as much as a few people have. So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome, northeast welcome to Mr. Neil Geddes-Ward.
Thank you.
And this talk is Encounters with Fairies, Ghosts and Spirits. So without further ado, I'm just going to say, hand it over to you, Neil.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for a lovely warm welcome to the Northeast. I've actually been around most parts of the UK, but I've never actually been to the Northeast. So this is my first visit to Newcastle. I've seen... I have seen the Angel of the North in the past, but I've zoomed past Newcastle on the way to Scotland, and I do have connections with Scotland, and I'll mention that in the talk. But I do have a friend up here, who's Justin from Washington, so he's always been visiting us down the south, so I thought it was about time I got up the north and saw a bit of his country, so thank you very much indeed. Anyway, I'll grab my notes here, and I'll proceed with the talk. I do know most of it off the top of my head, but now and again I do need pointers because I'm getting old. But anyway, yeah, this is Fairies, Ghosts and Spirits. I've had an interest in this whole phenomenon for the past 35 years, I would think. And obviously each time I do a talk like this, people sometimes come up to me and tell me their personal stories. So this talk is constantly evolving. And so if you see me, say, 3 years ago doing the talk I do today is perhaps slightly different. But there's some good favourite stories in there. And for anyone that's skeptics, and I can't imagine there's any skeptics here tonight, but skeptics will always say, show me the evidence and things like that. Well, most of the skeptics that I've ever met actually never researched this stuff. So the thing is, they're just being lazy. And it's people like yourselves who actually sort of start to turn the page to look for the evidence or actually meet people who've seen things. And they're not out to make money. They just want to shed some insight into what they might have seen or experienced. They're not out to make money. They just want to tell you their story. And this is the kind of encounters I've had with people. And these are just ordinary people. Most of them are completely unknown. Some of these things have happened to me, and I'll show you some stuff at the very end, which I think hopefully you'll find quite interesting. But these are just ordinary folk having miraculous, strange encounters. So let's proceed then. So that's me. That's Truth Seekers Northeast, and we'll get the ball rolling. Okay, a little bit about myself. I'm an artist, and there's some artwork here. You can come and see it later on. I've got some prints in the box there. Print of my a painting there by my girlfriend. There's an old photo album, some stuff. And I'm very much into everything sci-fi and strange and weird. So this is sort of the stuff that I've been drawing over the years. Drawings, pencils, a little bit of Photoshop. That's me a few years ago in our next door neighbour's garden. She'd gone away on holiday, so I thought, right, I'm going to grab her garden because it's bigger than ours. I'm going to put all my paintings in her garden and do a self-portrait there. So me with some of the paintings I do. Most of the paintings I do are oil paints. I prefer that as the chosen medium because you get nice blends on them. And a lot of this is kind of witchcraft and Wicca sort of stuff. I'm not a witch, I'm not a pagan, but because I was married to a lady who was a witch, a lot of the stuff that I was painting at the time was influenced by her, and we used to go to a lot of these events where you'd meet these kind of people, and that's the kind of prints you might find in the box today. But I'm very much into ghosts and UFOs and all the other kind of stuff that goes with it. My girlfriend now, she's an artist. Well, as I said, she's painted on the pictures there. We gave ourselves a challenge a few years ago where we actually painted the same picture. So there's us painting the picture side by side, and it actually became very much the same picture, except she added her own style to it, and I had my own style to myself. And as I mentioned to Maureen, we've got a Roxy, because her cat's a Roxy. That's our Roxy there, the little black and white dog who wants to always budge her nose into everything. And Justin's smiling there because he's him and Roxy are best buddies. And she always, there's her Kong, and she loves having her ears twiddled. And if you stop twiddling her ears, she nudges you and says, come on, carry on twiddling. So, yeah. So that's Monica's picture called The Arrival. And so there it is, a UFO landing on some strange alien planet with a girl looking up there. And the reason she decided to do that picture is because I had started my UFO picture, and she said, oh, I want to do a UFO picture. So she raced ahead and she actually beat me. She actually took over me and got her picture done there first. So well done, Monica. And that's my one there, UFO over the desert, which is perhaps Arizona in the United States with maybe an abandoned car. I always like my pictures to maybe tell little stories. So here's an old style classic car. The door is open. There's no driver. So your mind starts to turn things, well, where's the driver? What's happened to them? Are they in there or have they run away? You know, a lot of people interpret my pictures their own way, and it's really up to you to decide what may have happened or what might be about to happen. Now, when I was about 14 in this picture, I haven't changed, have I? So I used to make my own spaceships out of junk. So if you remember Blue Peter, I was actually featured on a Why Don't You BBC TV programme back in the 1979, 1980. And this is all made out of cardboard. Little bit cardboard folded over, and I've got a great big long cardboard tube going through the centre there. Bits of plastic model kits, Airfix kits and things, covering the whole thing, and spray can down and things like that. And it was just a hobby of mine. I had a great interest in making models and things. And I still make them today, really, many years later. So here's another one, again made out of cardboard and bits of kit there, all decorating it. This is a really old photo, it's slightly blurry, but that's the kind of thing that I've done. I'm just kind of giving a bit of background about myself, and I've also played in rock bands. So there's me with long hair, perhaps very unrecognisable, slightly short hair. That's my brother there, he's also a guitarist. So I actually taught him the basics guitar, and then he went on and became really, really good, a lot better than me. But I play the basic guitar, that's the one with 4 strings, and he plays a 6 string. So I do the boom, 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 and he does like noises. And about 12, 15 years ago, my ex-wife and I wrote a book which was published by Hay House Publishers called Faerie Craft. And this is really where the ball got rolling to do with the whole thing, investigation of fairies. I never really had a massive interest in the fairy world, but she did. And so I did the illustrations for the book, and this is my cover. Now, this is a bit of an interesting story behind this cover, is that there was a lady, and I won't mention names, at Hay House, who was the graphic designer who was in charge of producing covers for all the books. And I had a dream where I was doing all these great drawings, and I was handing them to this lady who was in a caravan with loads of kids and nappies and things, and she was cleaning all this sort of stuff. And she was just taking my drawings and colouring in and then getting loads of money for them. Weird dream. But what happened is that when the lady was coming up with various designs for the book cover, we were allowed as authors to reject or accept the book cover that she proposed. And each picture she gave to us, we heard, oh my God, I can't stand that one. So after about 2 months of frustration, one of the drawings I did for this book, which was this fairy girl here, I thought, well, I think that'd make quite a good cover. So I drew it all out and mocked it up, and I actually did the letters, not exactly that typography, but similar across there. But I put all these borders around it, and I sent it off to the publishers via email. I said, look, I've come up with this thing over the weekend. What do you think? And she goes, okay, I'll show it to XYZ lady and see what she thinks. And about a week later, they sent through this cover, which was my drawing, and all the lady had done was really just coloured in the background with purple, which I hadn't thought of. It's a nice colour, and everyone was singing her praises. And yet I thought, hang on, it was me that designed the cover. So essentially that dream came true. She was getting the money, the reward, which she was getting paid for it and getting the reward. So an interesting little snippet there. But that really set the ball rolling. We started to look into whole things about fairies and fairy lore and where they came from. And so a lot of the research that we did for that book now appears in this talk. Now, one of the things we found was a film on DVD called The Fairy Faith. And you can now find it on YouTube. So if anyone's interested to know more about it, type in The Fairy Faith and the name John Walker, or Walker, think of Walker's Crisps, anything like that to remind you. And someone's uploaded it up there, and it's got people's encounters with fairies. And he went all around the world, mostly Canada, Scotland, Ireland, maybe the United States, I can't remember. I think mostly Ireland he went to. But this first story was from Canada. And this lady here was in, I think it was about the late 70s, was with her young children. This is her daughter here, and they were obviously very much smaller then, to this area here, somewhere near a lake. And she took them on a little afternoon picnic, and she could hear this strange, eerie music, she said, and she couldn't work out where it was coming from. But instantly she felt the bristles stand on the back of her neck. She thought, I don't like the feeling of this, I want to get out of here. And so she decided that she was going to grab her kids and get out there. And they were just paddling in the lake. And she says, come on, you lot, out the lake. And her kids, of course, wanted to paddle. Why have we got to go? And the mum got angry. She says, get in the car, get in the car. And so she got them all in the car. And she said to her daughter, this lady here, she says, "Don't look out the window." And this daughter says in the video, she goes, "I remember my mum distinctly saying, 'Don't look out the window.' But as a child, I couldn't resist and I had to see what was coming out the window." And she said she peered out the back window as the car pulled away. And she said, and I'll just get to the picture here. She said that down this pathway, which you can see there, somewhere out there, she said that she saw a small group of beings all holding hands. And she's actually replicating, because the mother's saying, "Do what you saw." And she said, well, they did this kind of little dance. And they were all dancing like this, round and round, like a ring, if you like. But they were coming up the path. And this is where the strange music was coming from. And she remembers seeing that as the car screamed out of the valley. And it was quite a spooky story, because maybe they were going to get enchanted in some way. Again, these people are not famous. They're not making money out of it. This is just some story that they related. Now, also in this Fairy Faith video was this gentleman, and his name is Steve O'Dell, and he's from Glasgow, and he was a construction worker, but he had gone on holiday to Ireland, and here he is in the valleys of Ireland. They actually went to the location where this experience happened. He was by himself, and he said it had just rained, and the clouds were parting, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, and a lovely rainbow was forming over the valley. And he thought, wow, what a lovely view. And he just sat there, like he is there, with his feet out, looking at the scene unfold before him. And he thought, this is absolutely lovely. And he's so taken by the view that there was something, he said, out in his peripheral vision, somewhere down there near his feet, and he thought something distracting. He thought, no, I'm going to carry on looking at the view. This is so nice. But all the time, there was this thing, something down there out of his peripheral vision bothering him. And he thought, what is that? And he looked down, and he said he saw this small lady about that big. She had brown, leathery looking skin, a small brown, leathery kind of hat, and she had very old clothes. And he said she had what appeared to be old style sheep shears, rather like old big rusty scissors, in her hand. And this is where it gets really strange. So strap in. We're going on a bit of a weird journey. What happened was, he said that this lady was cutting round the sole of his shoe. And where his shadow extended, he said there was the male equivalent of this lady, the husband, if you like. This is where it gets really strange, rolling up his shadow like paper, like a paper roll. And he was looking, and you know when you see something completely off your scale of reality, he just didn't know what to think. And he said, "Oi!" Wow, saved by the bell. Right on cue. If it's someone for here, let's pretend I finished the talk, all right, and they come in, all right? So, little joke. I'll say, thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed the talk if they come in, all right? Let's just see. And just see that. Okay. It wasn't. Oh, damn it. That's a joke that's gone pear-shaped. Okay. It always works. No. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed the talk. Thanks very much for coming. Thank you. So, I'll be off now, and have a nice afternoon, everyone. No, it's all right. I'm only pulling your legs. Take a seat. Okay.
Oh, that was a joke. Well,
yeah. So anyway, this being was rolling up his shadow, and they cut this shadow away from this gentleman's feet. And he said, "Oi!" And he said, with that, they just looked at each other as if to say, "Oh my God, we've been seen." And they went, "Pff," and just vanished. And he said, "I dread to think what would happen if I hadn't looked down and seen them. What would they have done? What could they possibly do with his shadow? Is it like taking his soul in some way, or an essence of his energy? And furthermore, how can you roll up a shadow? Because that's just where light isn't hitting." And someone said it's like Peter Pan losing his shadow. I said, well, yeah, maybe the writer, John M. Barry, or whatever his name is, that wrote Peter Pan, had some ideas there that we don't know about. So very interesting that the guy's shadow had been removed from him, or was getting removed from him. Now, some years later, obviously after the book was published and we had all these stories out there, obviously I'd set up a fairy museum in the Orkney Islands where I lived for the time with all my artwork. And we was taking a holiday to Spain via EasyJet. So I was on this plane with my family. My son was sitting next to me. So this is the kind of layout. You've perhaps been on an EasyJet plane. It's very familiar there. I was somewhere down the front there. And obviously it's 3 seats. My son was sitting on the window aisle. I was sitting in the middle. And there was a gentleman who got on very last. and sat next to me. He was like the last passenger on. Now, we were heading to Spain, and this guy was dark-skinned, so I just assumed he was Spanish. We got into a bit of a conversation. It turned out, he said, I'm from Iran. He says, but I prefer to call it Persia, but, you would know it as Iran. He says, but I live in London. So we got chatting. I said, oh, what are you doing, going to Spain, a holiday? He goes, oh, no, I'm actually in the construction industry now. I've designed a load of properties, and I'm going out to Spain to kind of oversee, to make sure they're getting put together in the right way and stuff like that. And he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I do artwork and fairy stuff and whatnot. And I showed him a few of my pictures on my camera. And that prompted a little bit of a discussion into the esoteric realms a little bit. And he said that when he was a young man, he was posted as a soldier in Iran. And he would often have to do the night shift patrolling the streets of Iran. Oh, by the way, these pictures, they're not the actual happening. This is not the guy I met. These are just pictures I got on the internet. This is what I call my serving suggestion, okay? So he said that he was patrolling the streets of Iran with a fellow soldier with him. And he said, what is typical in that area? A sandstorm kicked up. Now, this would probably be somewhere in the 1970s, I imagine, given his age at the time. So he said a sandstorm is very common in those areas, and they decided to seek shelter in a mosque. And so he said that his buddy and him agreed that they would both take breaks. He would sleep, for an hour, and then during the night he'd wake his buddy up and he would sleep. So I found this picture of a mosque, someone having to sleep against the wall. So I'd imagine him and his buddy did a similar thing against the wall of a mosque, killing time in the mosque to escape the sandstorm. Well, this guy, Hussein, I'll call him. He didn't want his real name revealed, but I'll call him Hussein. I don't know what his surname was, Saddam, something like that, maybe. He said that he was the guy that was given the task of staying awake, and he had a gun with him, and his buddy went to sleep. And he couldn't help it. He just kept falling asleep. And he'd drift off to sleep and then wake up again. Go, I must stay awake, I must stay awake. And then he couldn't help it, bang, he drifted off to sleep again. And that happened 3 times, he drifted off to sleep. And on the 3rd time, he woke up, he said he saw this woman sitting down in front of him, staring at his feet. And next to this woman was a young girl staring at his friend's feet, intently looking at their feet. And remember, in mosques, you take your shoes off. So they had their maybe bare feet or socks or something. They were just staring at their feet. And he thought, where did this woman come from? I didn't hear any noise. Where did she come from? And he thought, I don't like this. And he said he tried to wake his friend up by pressing his elbow on his chest. He said no matter how hard he pressed, his friend wouldn't wake up. And so he thought, I don't like this, I'm going to get out of here. And yet he was the guy with the gun. He said he started to wrap the strap of the gun around his arm so the gun wouldn't swing as he ran away. You're the guy with the gun. And as he did this, he said the movement must have triggered off this woman to look up. And he said she looked up and looked it in his eyes. And he said, as soon as I made eye contact with her, I just knew that she was not from this world. There was something that just said it. She was not from this world. And he said, at that point, the lady and the young girl, who was about 10 years old, stood up and walked away. And as he said, as they walked away, I noticed they both had cloven hooved feet. Yeah, absolutely. When he told me that, I went, ooh, can we land now? So I couldn't quite find the image that I was after, but this is a kind of thing that you might have seen. But this lady's got cloven hooved feet, I hope, unless she's been in a strange shoe shop. But I'd imagine, that sort of outfit, she might have had something like that with cloven hooved feet. And it's interesting that in those parts where they do have legends of people with cloven hooved feet. So what do you make of that? Was that a fairy being? We hear of Pan, we hear of people that are half man, half beast, and we wonder where these legends come from. Do they intrude into our world? And being in a mosque, a holy place where people do a lot of psychic energy praying and things like that, does that generate some kind of force that makes the two worlds closer? And I wouldn't say they're a traditional spirit world afterlife resident. They're perhaps from some other dimension that we're unaware of. But when you think about it, you can see why they were staring at his feet, because to them, the human feet were the odd things, whereas to us, the cloven feet would be the odd thing. So it's a very interesting thing, I thought. Very, very spooky story. And he said he didn't want his name published. He wasn't going to make any money. It was just something he wanted to relate. And he perhaps would have never told anyone, other than the fact that I started telling him about strange experiences, it prompted him to tell me something of his. Okay, so the next story is, yes. Now, this is the Orkney Islands. I mentioned there that I lived there for a while. I lived in this place called Westray, an island up there. My children still live up there, and we're going to be talking about Orkney later on because that comes up in another story. But obviously, I got to know a few people up there. I met this guy who was an English guy living up there, and he felt that he lived in perhaps one of the oldest properties in Orkney. He said that he lived what he thought was an old monastery. And he said that oftentimes in his very, very old house, he would see down the hallway what appeared to be a monk sitting down, and he had a glow on his face on one side as if he was in front of a fire that was there at one time. And he appeared to be chatting, but he couldn't be heard. He was chatting to someone by a fire, but he couldn't see who he was chatting to, and he couldn't hear a sound. Incidentally, I've heard a story, I don't know how true this is, but there's been some research to suggest that when people have seen spirits or ghosts from the past, the sound of them vanishes after 200 years. So the audio side of the ghost seems to dissipate the energy. And this is what I think about ghosts, is that they're not necessarily spirits that will communicate with you. They're more like video recordings of the past. And this is perhaps why the energy dissipates over some time. And that's maybe why we can't hear the sound after 200 years. There's no reports of sound with certain ghosts. And this guy this monk didn't interact with this guy that saw him. He just seemed to be replaying an instant. And maybe this guy was psychic enough to tune into it. And there he could see on quite regular occasions this monk sitting in his hallway having a chat to someone that he couldn't see. So I thought that was a very interesting story. Now, that's the kind of monk I'd imagine he saw, maybe. I don't know. I don't think he had a glass of wine with him, but that's, again, another image I got off the internet there. Now, what's our next story? Yeah, so this story now takes us down to Devon, so the other end of the country. I did know some people who used to come to my Pagan group many years ago, back in the 1990s, called Adam and Deborah. And they told me that once they went on a holiday down to this part of the world, and they stayed in like an old B&B building, and it was out on the moor somewhere, really kind of wild and stuff, not much stuff around there. And they could hear some strange noises on their first night there. And Adam went downstairs to the living room, apparently, and Deborah got up and went downstairs to get a drink from the kitchen. And Adam apparently encountered three, I don't know what they'd be called. If you think of that Sharp TV series, the kind of soldiers in that, I don't know what period of drama, 1700s, some soldiers from that period, three of them in the house. And apparently they appear to have a frosted look over them, as if the impression he got was that they died out on the moors of hypothermia or something. But they were making the lights flicker. They were very fascinated with the electricity or something. So maybe from their point of view, they were real spirits that just hadn't gone on to the next world because they were somehow interacting with the present day environment. Now, Deborah, she went into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and she said she saw a girl, a small girl, about 11 years old, and she said she saw this blue light emanating from the back of her head. This is the kind of thing it was. It was originally a sweet shop, apparently. But she said she saw this girl with this blue light emanating from the back of her head. And this girl kept saying, "I want chocolate, I want chocolate." And she says, "Who are you?" And this girl just saying, "I want chocolate." Now, Deborah got the kind of impression that this was an injury in her lifetime. And maybe when she died, she felt that maybe she got this psychically. She had been pushed down the stairs or had an accident down the stairs and banged her head. So that when she was seen as a spirit or a ghost, this light, the injury, was shining out of her in this kind of auric fashion of energy or something. But the very next day, this girl went away. The very next day, when they got in there, they said, "No, we're getting out of here. This house is as haunted as beep." They wanted to get out of there. And they said that they saw this photo on the mantelpiece. And it was a photo like this, and it showed it as an original sweet shop. And in the picture was the girl that Deborah had seen in the kitchen the night before. So she felt that she must have lived there at some point. So there we go. That's the Haunted Sweet Shop, sponsored by Cadbury's. Now, I know some of you do tarots and things like that. It's very good. I used to dabble with tarot cards some years ago, and people used to come to my house to do readings, have readings, and I'd give them readings. Bit of a different set from this one, but this gives an idea. And I met this very old lady one time. She rang me up and she says, I don't drive, can you come to me? And went, oh, all right, okay, I'll come to you. So I drove over to her place, about 10 miles away, and I gave her this tarot card reading, about 20, 30 minutes worth of tarot card reading. She goes, that's very, very interesting. It's very accurate. I said, thank you. She goes, now, you haven't mentioned my husband in this. I said, well no, I haven't. I said, I didn't feel him around. She goes, well, let me show you. And she goes, she lived in a bungalow, and she said, in this bedroom, my husband spent the last year of his life ill in bed, and he was so ill that he had to have an oxygen mask to help him breathe. And she goes, every day she used to puff his pillows up to make him more comfortable. And she goes, one day she was puffing his pillows up, and she leaned him forward, and he just kept saying, oh, I feel so ill. And he goes, I feel so ill, I want to die. And she said, promptly at that point, he literally died in her arms, and she sort of laid him back down, and she said she saw this vaporous mist come out of his chest and went across the ceiling and into the airing cupboard of the corner of the bedroom. Oh, wasn't that moving? That's it. And she said, 6 months later, and she said, I told this to my doctor and he just laughed. But she goes, 6 months later, out of that airing cupboard, about 3 a.m., I saw a red Indian. That was her words, a red Indian. And she said she could only see him from the chest upwards. And he was doing this, like scrabbling to get out. And she said he had kind of a necklace on. He said he had more feathers maybe. But she could only see that section, just the chest, no legs, trying to get out of the cupboard. But behind him was another man. And behind him was a third man who she said was more silhouetted, but he appeared to have the shape of perhaps a bowler hat on of some kind. And she said it didn't happen once. She said she was seeing it regularly. Every night she'd wake up and see this Native American Indian. I say Native American, but she was saying red Indian coming out the cupboard. She goes, and I know you won't laugh, but I was trying to zip my mouth because around that time the book had come out called The Indian in the Cupboard. And my mind kept thinking back to that film as well. But at the same time, I was also taking it seriously. I was absolutely fascinated with this story. Now, this lady had never been to a spiritualist church or anything, had never been to a medium. This is probably her first ever tarot card reading. So she had no idea of the idea of spirit guides. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you know about spirit guides. Is there anyone that doesn't? Okay, that's good. So most spirit guides in most reports tend to be seen as Native American Indians. It's not the total rule of thumb because you can have Chinese guides and things like that. And the idea is that, as explained to me anyway, was that Native Americans are much more in tune with nature. They're much more spiritual. So when they go to the other side, they're much more advanced than the average person, say, on the streets of Britain or America. That's very much materialistic thinking, perhaps. And so therefore, they can help people on the other side a little bit better. And I suspected that maybe the gentleman behind him was perhaps her husband. I said, I bet your husband didn't believe in any of this kind of stuff, did he? And she goes, no, he thought it was a load of old rubbish. I said, I think that's part of the key. I said, your husband, I think, is the gentleman behind him, and he's trying to bring your husband back. And I said, I believe that you yourself are psychic. And I said, your doorway there, your cupboard, is acting as a kind of doorway between this world and the next. I said, this is because you saw, I believe, the spirit of your husband go into that cupboard, and then 6 months later, you got a spirit guide trying to bring him back out. And I said, I believe he wants to try and communicate with you. And she goes, well, what do I do? I said, well, next time you see it, try and ask him questions. I said, if you don't get anywhere, then I suggest you contact the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain or the College of Psychic Studies. And this was before the internet. So I said, you'll have to ring 192, direct your inquiries, and they can put you through and tell them what you told me and see if they can offer help. And anyway, I got back in the car and I thought, crikey. And I didn't look in my rearview mirror when I was driving home. And I thought, my God, you know, that lady is certainly seeing something. Now, I believe that doorways, lots of spirits are seen in doorways. And I got this little theory about the energy of doorways. I suspect that things like this, where he's got a medium's cabinet here, the medium sits in there, and the way it's explained to me is that the curtains are drawn and they can build up an energy in there, and that can be a manifestation. Maybe a physical being could walk out there from the spirit world, manifested in ectoplasm or something like that. And it's told to me that it helps contain the energy a bit. Now, I liken that to maybe an oven. is that when you're making something as cakes or something, you put it in there as a liquid state, but you have to keep the oven door shut so the temperature builds up and it changes it from a liquid to a solid. And hey presto, out come your cakes, but sometimes not your Auntie Bessie or something who's materialised from the spirit world, hopefully coming out your oven. But I believe that doorways act in a similar fashion. And so this is why I believe that spirits will often manifest in a doorway, because they can bounce energy around the frame of a doorway or a window, similar to a medium's cabinet. And this is why I believe that that spirit guide had come out the cupboard, because it's manifesting or using that energy of the doorway in some way. And there's another one there, just they get pretty fancy, these mediumistic cabinets. And there is a trumpet there, which supposedly ectoplasm would form inside that trumpet and be almost like a vocal box. And a spirit can manifest its voice through this and get amplified through that trumpet. I've seen a few of those. I'm not convinced totally. I'm not saying they're rubbish. I'm just saying I'm not totally convinced by the ones I've seen on that. Now, anyway, moving around the world a little bit more. This is the West Indies. And I used to work at this broadcasting place near London, and I got to know quite a few people there on the night shift, because I used to work night shifts there. And there was a guy there who was a security guard called Owen. And one time there, I'll just have a swig of water. One time there, I overheard him chatting to this girl, and he said she was white as that fridge freezer, which, because we were in the kitchen, and I thought, fridge freezer? What are you talking about? White as a fridge freezer? I said, what are you talking about? Because I was very intrigued. It sounded very interesting. He says, this woman I saw. So I said, well, tell me. He said, well, when I used to live in, and I think it was this place here, maybe St. Lucia or something like that. I'm not 100% certain. He lived on one of these islands. He said, when I lived there, I was at the bar one night with one of my friends, and we decided to walk home one night. And we'd always take the same route home, and we'd walk past like the local church on the hill. And as they walked around the graveyard and up the church on top of the hill, he said, I saw this 50-foot woman sitting on the church roof. Something like that, I'd imagine. So you imagine like sitting on a doll's house. This is the kind of thing that was faced Owen and his friend. And his friend cowered behind a gravestone. And he said, do you see this too? And he goes, yeah, I see it. And he thought, what the hell's that? So he said that he picked up a rock and he threw it at this 50-foot woman. But it went straight through them. And I said, well, what happened then? He said, this woman stepped off the roof of the church. And now something pivotal happened in my consciousness. I realised a major point. This is why they're always trying to raise money for church roofs. Remember that. 50-foot women. So this woman climbed off the church roof, and he said she started to walk towards him. And as she came towards him, she shrunk in size and then vanished into the ground before him. I thought, oh my God. Now, that is he said, I don't believe in ghosts or ghoulies and things that go bump in the night. But I said, you just saw a 50-foot woman sitting on a church roof. He goes, I know I did, but I don't believe in them. I thought, what? I think he was in fear of them. And if he accepted the reality, then it would open up a whole can of worms that he didn't want to look at. So he just didn't want to know about it. And then when he came to this country, he said that one time he was driving along, and he was driving down this stretch of road, and in his rearview mirror, he said he saw a woman sitting in the back of his car. And he went, oh, and without realising, he put his foot on the accelerator and he started speeding. And before long, he was pulled over by a police officer, and they said, we saw you speeding, in this road. He goes, yeah, I'm really sorry, officer, but you don't believe this, but I saw this lady sitting in the back of my car. I saw her in the rearview mirror, and she just frightened the hell out of me. He goes, that's all right, you can go. And he said the way he said it is almost as if other people had maybe said the same sort of story to this police officer, and he'd heard it before on this stretch of road. So it's a very interesting thing. And I think Owen, this security guard, was psychic, and this is why he was seeing these things. And so, but his friend must have been psychic too, to see this 50-foot woman sitting on the roof of the church. Now, was she an angel? Was she a fairy or a ghost? I've heard of things like guardians of certain areas, and maybe this lady was a guardian of this area. I don't know how they protect it or anything like that, but it's just a story I've heard. They're guardians of groves and places like that. So maybe this lady was somehow associated with that church. It's interesting that she was associated with this church, and the lady we met earlier who had the cloven hoof was associated with a mosque. So they're both places of worship, different religions, but both places of worship and intent and focus. Now, we mentioned mirrors with Owen before, where he saw this lady in the back of his car. Well, I run this paranormal group down in High Wycombe, and we had a chap here come to do a talk for us once, and he worked for the RAC. And he said on one particular trip, he was actually a ghost hunter. He would go out with his girlfriend and try to go to old haunted houses and places and churchyards and things and detect ghosts. And he said that one time on his night shift, he had been called to a place where an ambulance had broken down. And because this ambulance had broken down, they had to get it back to a garage or a depot to get it fixed. And he was legally entitled to drive the ambulance because of his position as an RAC engineer. So he jumped in the ambulance to drive it back to the place, went, get the mirror, straighten it up, because obviously, different height and everything, straighten the mirror. And again, he saw a lady sitting in the back of the ambulance, possibly a patient that had died in the ambulance. And when you think about it, a lot of people are dead on arrival at hospitals. And so literally they're passing out of their body somewhere in the ambulance at some point. And it must be quite a shock to them. And so I think that what he had seen was maybe the last energy of that person before they was taken on, or that person could still be haunting the ambulance because they don't understand what's happened to them. And I always feel it's a really good idea to try and get some understanding of life after death, because it does help you when you cross over. It's like when you're going to go to a new school as a kid, you might have been shown around the school before you actually went there to get an idea of who you was as a teacher, where your desk was going to be. Whereas if you came in straight away, you wouldn't know anything. It's more of a shock to you and more nervous. And I think it helps to have an understanding of this kind of thing before you cross over. So Owen there, sorry, not Owen, I forget the guy's name now, but he said that he saw a spirit sitting in the back of his ambulance there. Something like that, I would imagine. Not maybe as scary as that, but the kind of thing, it happens. Now, it's interesting that Egyptians have scrying mirrors, and they used to communicate with the dead. And so I think there's something associated with mirrors that the spirits can somehow communicate via a mirror. Upon reflection, I think it's a good idea. Pardon the pun. Now, still continuing the theme of the NHS, because it's a good place to find spirits. This is Southampton Hospital. They obviously had a few leftover bricks because they had to just fold that bit over. But this was perhaps the scene of many ghost stories. I did meet someone at a birthday party a few years ago, and we was all around the campfire discussing things, and I was told to tell them some of my spirit and ghost stories, so I did. And there was this girl who was a nurse there, and I didn't know her. And she says, well, I don't normally tell people this story, but I'll tell you this because you're into it. She goes, I work at possibly this hospital. I know it's somewhere on the south coast. And she said, on the 4th floor, you've got all the paramedics or doctors and medical people. And on the 2nd or 3rd floor down here, you've got the people that are seriously ill, wired up to heart machines and all sorts of things on their beds. And he said that, in fact, I'm going to go back on that a little bit. Just a second. He said that what would happen is that these guys would have pagers, and if someone had crashed, i.e. their heart stopped beating or some emergency was happening, they would get a pager to say, you've got to get down to the next floor down or wherever it is because a patient's crashed and you've got to revive them. So that's what happened. They went down the stairs. You don't wait for the list in those places. You just run down the stairs, and it's 3 doctors, or maybe a doctor and 2 assistants, running down the stairs, and as they came down the stairs, they found a girl, a patient, sitting on the stairs. And they thought, what are you doing here? And she just kept saying, my stomach hurts, my stomach hurts. And they said, well, you shouldn't be here, you should be back in your bed. And she just kept saying, my stomach really hurts. And so they said, well, look, wait here, we'll go and get someone to help you, but we've got to go and sort a patient out. And so they ran down to the next floor, and when they got there, they found the girl that they were being asked to treat or try and revive was the very same girl they'd met on the stairs. And here she was dead on the bed in the hospital, and yet they'd seen her on the stairs earlier as they ran down. And so I thought, that's very interesting, but why was her stomach hurting? If she's died and come out of her body, why is she sitting on the stairs and why is her stomach hurting? And I formulated a theory. It could be shot down if you like, I don't care, but it's just an idea, it might explain it, is that I've read that we've got these astral cords that connect us, rather like umbilical cords from a baby to a womb, is that they say that these astral cords might attach to us and it goes back to our earthly body. And supposedly that on the point of death, your astral cord supposedly breaks, and it even says something like that in the Bible, thus the silver cord will break, or something it says in the Bible. And once that is broken, then you're actually physically detached from your earthly body. And I wonder it's somehow that this astral cord had broken, snapped, and this girl, because she was visible by the doctors and could communicate to a certain extent, that she was still feeling the pain of that separation because she was still connected to a certain point with the earth realm. It's only when that she could then go on to the next realm that that pain, I presume, would disappear, but she was still feeling the emotions and the pain of the earth realm. And in fact, that when mediums bring back people from the afterlife in a communication, it's quite often the case the medium will feel the pain of how that person might have died as they relive those earth energies that come back into their psychic aura, if you like, into their system. And so, of course, they went back to the stairs and this girl was no longer there. So I presume by that point, someone had come to collect her. But yeah, I think she had drifted out. And again, she was in a stairway, kind of a box-like structure, which might have contained her energy and maybe held her there. And it's quite a common thing, you know, that there's many, many people die in hospitals. So this is why people and babies die in hospitals. And this is the next story. After one such talk, I think I gave it at the Probe conference 2 years ago, a lady came up to me and she said, I really like what you said about the cloven-hoofed people. She goes, but I've got a story to tell you. I said, what's that? And she goes, well, unfortunately, my baby died stillborn in hospital. And she goes, she was put in a room with it in this hospital. And there was the baby dead in this cot. And she said she sat on the edge of the bed with her hands in her head, thinking, how can I be strong for my family? I've just lost a baby here and I've got to be strong for my whole family. And I just don't know how I'm going to carry on. And she said at that point, the door opened and in came, she says, 5 or 6 miniature, and this is weird, miniature centaurs, people, bodies with like horses' lower sections. And she says they weren't beautiful or pretty. She says they were really ugly. They came in and she says 2 of them peered into the cot where the dead baby was. And one of them kind of trotted up, if you like, and stared at her in the face and looked at her in the face and just looked at her. And she was totally calmed out and she didn't know what to think. And it kind of made her all tranquil and it maybe lifted her mood somewhat. But she said after that, they vanished and she felt like a lot of weight had been lifted from her mind. And so somehow these creatures, maybe they were meant to be there, I don't know. But what they're doing as centaurs, I haven't got the foggiest, but it was a very, very strange thing that these creatures are somehow come in to appear to help the woman. So that's an interesting story. So that's a kind of, I mean, I've got a centaur. I wouldn't say it was like that. But for anyone that doesn't know what a centaur is, that's the kind of thing, a human body with a horse-like body below. Not with movable arms or gripping hands like that, I would hope. But that gives people an idea if they've never heard of a centaur. Now, this is a chap that maybe it's worth getting this guy up to do a talk for you. This is Dr. Ian Rubinstein, and he works in a surgery in Enfield in Middlesex, near London, and he's actually found that he's a psychic doctor, would you believe? So although he treats patients under the NHS as a regular GP, he actually sees spirits sometimes in his surgery. Now, he said as a younger man, he had the hots for this girl, but she had more the hots for him. And he was with this girl and his sister and a few other teenagers in this room. And he said he was playing with her emotions a little bit, tugging her along, leading her down the garden path, I guess. And he said that he saw, I'll just tell you that this is the book he's written, if anyone wants to check it out. Consult in Spirit by Ian Rubinstein. So if you want to remember that, if you want to read into it more, he tells you more about his stories in the book. But he said that basically this girl that had had the hots for him, suddenly she just went into a complete and utter trance, spontaneously. And he said her face transfigured, we talked about this yesterday, transfiguration mediumship is where a spirit's face can over-impress the living in some way. Almost like a mask of the spirit goes over the living person. He said this girl had no mediumistic abilities whatsoever, so as far as he knew, but the face transfigured. And he said to him, it looked rather like the Snow Queen. He said she had frosted lips, very cold, pale-looking face, and she had the most piercing eyes. And she just looked at him, and he went like that, looked, and he said he heard a gasp, and that was his sister who was looking at it sideways, and he says, you can see it? And she goes, yes. So his sister saw it as well, and they both looked at this transfigured face, and she spoke in a different voice, and she said, stop messing about with this girl's emotions, or something to that effect. Stop messing this girl about. And then it all faded away, and the girl came back to normal, and she had no idea what had happened. And it completely freaked him out. And from that point on, he was intrigued enough to investigate it, and he actually went to psychic developing circles. And on one particular occasion, he said that he was in his surgery, and this lady came for some treatment for depression. So he was asking her what sort of things have happened. And whilst she was chatting to him, he said he could see the shape of a soldier forming behind her, and he could see it clairvoyantly. It wasn't a materialization as such. He could see the clairvoyant image of a soldier, and he got the impressions that this was her father. And he said, have you lost a father that was in the military? And she says, yes. And he said, well, I feel he's here now, and he wants to let you know he's okay. Don't worry about him. And that completely changed her. Apparently this guy, her father, was killed by the IRA many, many years ago, and it was coming up to the anniversary of her father's death. She felt quite depressed, and he said, right, I'll now write out a prescription for antidepressants. She goes, I don't want them now. She goes, you've given me what I needed, which was some message from my father. So, of course, the word was getting around in the surgery that they had a psychic GP amongst their midst. And so when people would go in for an appointment, doctor, I've got a sore knee or I've got a sore elbow, he would look at their elbow or whatever. They'd go out to the receptionist. She goes, I want to make a complaint. And they go, why is that? He said, well, the doctor saw my arm. And go, yeah. She goes, but he didn't give me a reading. So I'd imagine he's getting quite a few appointments these days. But that's Dr. Ian Rubenstein. Very, very lovely guy. And he's a really good speaker. So he's worth getting up here to do a talk at some point. And that's the kind of transfiguration that might happen, is that you might have a medium's face, and a face of a guide or a person might appear over it. Now, I've been to a transfiguration demonstration, but I never saw anything. That's not to say it doesn't happen. On the occasion that I saw it, I never saw a thing. And I remember holding this spirit, this medium's hands, and he said, sit close to me. And he leaned into these red lights, infrared lights, so I could see him. And I was trying to look carefully. I said, I'm sorry, I can't see a thing. And he said, I'll try it again. And he leaned in. I said, I'm sorry, I still can't see a thing. Yet all the people standing behind me kept saying, oh my God, look at that face changing. I thought, well, what are you seeing that I can't? Because I just couldn't see a thing. And he says, we'll try it one more time. So on the third time, he leaned in, and I was looking. No, most people might say, oh, thanks very much, that's lovely. But I thought, no, I'm going to be honest, I can't see a thing. I'm sorry. And he goes, okay. Now he said to the lady next to me, who was the organizer of the event, he said, make sure this man, meaning me, gets a full refund. And she goes, yes, I will. Well, do you know what? I still never got a refund. So I think the spirit world owes me 20 quid, basically. So they're going to get a letter in the post. What's the next story? Right. Ah, yes. Yeah, I'm remembering the stories now. Okay, so most of these stories are from people that I know, and this one's from a friend of mine. And she used to be married to a guy that was in the military many years ago, and he was stationed out in Germany. And he also went and fought in the first Gulf War in the 1991, I think it was, out in Iraq or wherever it was. And like a lot of those people that fought in that war, he came back mentally scarred, and he had a hard time trying to cope with it. And Juliet, that's her name, she said that they were going through some marriage troubles after that, and they'd got young children, and she was stationed out in military with him, in Germany with him, in a military base out there. And they were living separate lives for a little bit. He was in one house, and she was living maybe with some friends and her young children. But she said, I was going to take the kids round to see him, so he could see the kids one day. And she went round there, and the little girl, who's probably 5 at the time, she says, Mummy, why is Daddy hanging from a tree in the garden? And she looked through, and she could see their dad had hung himself. So it was like, oh my God, get the kids out and everything like that. He'd hung himself. Now, when the military police went in to investigate this, they found down in the basement that this guy had made a noose for the kids as well, and for the dog, and he was going to hang them all, which was really, really shocking. He was really disturbed by the whole thing. And he just decided at some point, no, he's going to take his own life. So it was very fortunate the kids didn't go there. And anyway, she said that she had spent the night, I don't know how far, maybe a few nights afterwards, she was laying down with the kids trying to get them to sleep at her friend's house. And she was laying down next to her daughter. And then suddenly, next to her, this figure sat up in bed next to her, and it was her husband who had killed himself. And he just looked at her, and his lip was like that, sort of pulled to one side. And she went, go away, go away, go away. And he kind of dissipated and vanished. And maybe about a week or two after that, when it was time for the funeral, she said that when she saw him in the coffin, she said his lip was exactly that same position as he was manifested. Now, I forgot to mention in this story that maybe about 3 months before all this happened, she woke up in bed and she said she saw her grandmother and her former hairdresser appear at the end of the bed in this sparkling light, she said. And they just said, don't let your children stay with your husband. Get them out. Get them out. Don't let the children stay with your husband. And that was it. They'd gone. She goes, no, come back. And they'd gone. And that was a warning. Don't let the children near your husband. And so obviously in hindsight, where he's preparing the news from, this was what's going to happen. So maybe the spirit world intervened in some way and prevented him from getting to the children. I don't know. But he was obviously very, very definitely disturbed. And he was perhaps an earthbound spirit now. And he was trying to wake up and come out, you know, and appear in the lady's bedroom. So that was a very sad story. Now, people have asked me, when I've done these talks, they say, do ghosts come in different shapes and sizes? And I said, what do you mean then exactly? And he says, well, when I was an apprentice electrical engineer in about 1969, 1970, I worked at a secret base, if you like, which was maybe something like this. And this is a place, I think, down in the south where they do military research and some talk of UFO research there as well. And he said that we were working in this very old house, which was perhaps something like that. This is at the same place. And he said that I was on one side of the room working at my desk. And he said we were doing the development of what you might call today as a silicon chip. We were kind of looking into that early technology of the silicon chip back then. I was working on one side of the room and my colleague was working on the other at his bench. And he said, and suddenly the whole room that they were working in was lit up with blue light. And they thought, where's that light come from? Who switched the light on? They both looked around to each other, and as they looked around at each other, he said they saw this glowing blue-green box, and I would say it's about the size of a shoebox, he described it as. It had come through the door and was floating down the room between them, just floating down the room between them. And they just looked in awe at this glowing blue box between them. And he said it went down and through the other door, turned right and went down the corridor. And they're absolutely gobsmacked. What the bloody hell's that? And so they went and found their boss. And they said to their boss, you're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe this. And they told him what they'd seen. He goes, oh, yeah, come with me. And he took him to meet this really old boy that had been there donkey's years. And he says, tell Fred here what you've just seen. So they said, well, we've just seen this glowing blue blocks. And Fred, the old boy, said, yeah, I've seen it too. And apparently this blue glowing box was a regular visitor to this research establishment, military establishment, connections with the MOD and things like that. And it was floating around looking at stuff, we assume. Now, I don't think it was a ghost because he wondered if it was a ghost. I said that I don't think ghosts go around as floating blue boxes. I said, based on my UFO research, I suspect it's more of a reconnaissance device set up by some foreign intelligence. You could say it's Russians or Chinese, but I don't think so. I think it's more likely to be something extraterrestrial because I've heard stories of similar places where security guards were walking down on the night shift of these research and development places. And again, they've seen blue and glow lights in rooms. They've opened the door to see what it is. And they said they've seen a humanoid figure with a helmet thumbing through filing cabinets. As soon as he's spotted, this guy just vanishes, and this poor security guard had to be whisked away to a psychiatric unit. But they appear with this blue and glow light. So based upon that story, I suspect that this blue and glow light was possibly something to do with that kind of thing, a reconnaissance device, checking out and maybe recording the environment in some way, I don't know, to report back to ET base or wherever they're from. So I suspect that that's possibly not a ghost as we understand it. Now, I think we probably, yeah. Now, I think what I'll do, did you want to take a break now, Maureen, or we can?
Yeah, we can have a 20-minute break.
Yep.
More teas and coffees in for those who are late. You get a free raffle ticket and coffee with the admission. And then when we come back, you're going to...
yeah, I'll do a part two
two,
with questions and answers.
And during the break, people can look at your
Yeah,
friends'
that's no problem at all. No problem at all, yeah.
Very good. Yes, we'll have a break.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody, for a minute. Thank you.
Neil's going to kick off with the second half of this fascinating talk, so without further ado.
Thank you, everybody. What I'll do, I'll dub in extra clapping for my video. So it sounds like I'm there with loads of people. Got that light there. It's no problem to me, but if... Okay. Okay. Right. Before I proceed with the talk, there's a few things I was going to mention in part one that slipped my mind. Obviously, I was telling you stories of other people. Now, I've obviously been researching this stuff myself. I've been in psychic developing circles, and I always doubted that I had any psychic ability. But when an opportunity came up to join a psychic developing circle, I thought I'll give it a go. And lo and behold, after maybe 6 months of practicing, I actually started to get things right. Stuff that you couldn't have possibly put down to chance. And I've had debates with people online and in person that I don't think it's cold reading. These skeptics are out to write off mediums in one blanket statement that it's cold reading. They're looking the way you cross your legs or things like that. And I just don't believe that. There might be elements of that when some of it. I mean, there's some people that are good mediums and some people that are not so good mediums. And when a medium gets up on stage and they're brave enough to say, I'm sorry, I can't get anything, that to me says that they're genuine, because at least they're being honest and said, I've had a good crack at it and I just can't do anything today. I feel under the weather or whatever. Now, I've been, as I say, investigating this for a long, long time, and I've seen really extremely accurate mediums, and I've also seen really, really bad ones, and possibly ones that are fake. So I'm happy to tell you about some of those stories. I mentioned the transfiguration thing briefly in part one, and I went and saw this medium somewhere in Middlesex about 7 years ago, and he supposedly would sit in a chair and he'd have two infrared lights. It was a room rather like this, but they blacked out all the windows and everything like that. And the idea is that you'd only see him in an infrared light, being that that was the conditions that was needed to produce this phenomena. In the same way in the old days that film was developed in a dark room and they'd switch on a red light so the film wouldn't get spoiled. If you put it under normal light, the phenomenon would vanish or be distorted in some way, perhaps. So this guy had two red lights on him, and he brought through people's relatives, and I couldn't actually see anything transfigure over his face. And he would lean forward into the lights, and I would see nothing, you know. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't see anything. And as I said, you know, they said they'd give me 20 quid back, but I never saw anything. But that was one example. But then I've seen other mediums at other places. There's a place down in Banbury in Oxfordshire, and I think the people that run it are genuine. They've got good intentions, but I don't think necessarily the people that are visiting mediums have always got the good intentions behind them. There was a guy there called, should I say his name? Yeah, Meadows. Bill Meadows, his name was. And he was a very old gent, and he came and did a demonstration, and rather like the medium's cabinets you saw in the pictures there, he sat in a medium's cabinet, and it's rather a room like this, except there was a division down the central aisle, and I was sitting maybe towards the back in the central aisle, and they velcroed him up, the idea to rule out fakery, that if he moves his arms or legs, you would hear that as the velcro breaks, the idea of being that, and his mouth would be taped. And all the lights went out, and it was a Christmas tree seance, and music played, and you could hear drums. There was a little kid's drum set at the front, and these drums were being played really magnificently here. You know, the roll of the drums really fantastically at the front, but this is a complete darkness. And then you would see shapes come through the curtains of supposed spirits and things. And they said that this spirit that was going to come through was called Jonathan, and his voice to me sounded like the actor Richard Harris. And I thought, God, that sounds exactly like Richard Harris to me. And they said that later on, Jonathan felt the conditions were right to be able to manifest his hand, at least, as a physical thing. I thought, oh, this sounds good. So I saw this hand come out from under the curtain. The curtain lifted maybe a foot off the ground. This hand came out and waved to everybody, a bare arm, and then slid back. And I heard someone say, oh, it's dematerialising. Now, because I was in the central aisle, I leant right down, almost on my hands and feet, to try and see under the curtain. And I saw this arm sliding back like a snake, and then I saw it lift up off the ground. And I thought, hang on, if it's dematerialising, I thought these things dissipated into the ground or just vanished. Where's it being lifted up to? So that got me a bit suspicious. So later on, they invited the guy at the front. They said, you can come out and shake hands with Jonathan. So he came right out and he went to lift up the curtain. They said, no, don't lift up the curtain, they said. So he goes, oh, all right then. So he just shook the hand and then went back, sat in his seat. So they said, okay, we now feel confident that we can, Jonathan's energy is strong enough, he feels he can shake hands with everybody. So everybody form a queue and come down one at a time to shake hands with him. So I thought, well, okay. Now, I've never shaken hands with a dead person before, the spirit hand. I've read that they feel waxy to touch, rather like holding a candle. So I was kind of under the expectation that's maybe what I'd feel. So I got in the queue and I was maybe, near the end of the queue, and I got up and I went down and I shook hands with his hand. It felt human to me. It gave me the thumbs up. I gave it a firm grip. It gave me the thumbs up. It felt human. It didn't feel waxy at all. So I thought, I think this is a real hand. So I went and sat back in the chair. And now at the end of the seance, the lights went up and everything. And I was speaking to the medium's wife, and she was saying that her husband was Irish. And I thought, oh, right, okay. Now, the medium's brother was also sat at the front, so I presume he was Irish as well. So my mind was ticking over, a little suspicious mode here. And I'm thinking, okay, from Ireland, well, maybe he might have played drums in like the Boys Brigade in Ireland or something like that. The medium's brother could easily be an accomplice that could do some of the physical manifestations. So, for instance, he could be doing the drums in the darkness, and because it was a Christmas tree seance, presents were being thrown from this Christmas tree in the darkness, and this little dolly landed on my lap. And I took it home because I thought, okay, I was allowed to take it home. But he could have easily been throwing the stuff out, you see. So my suspicions were right up in the red by this point. And when she said that her husband was Irish, but the spirit guide Jonathan was a Cockney from the East End of London, and yet I said earlier he sounded like Richard Harris, I thought, hang on a minute, shouldn't he sound like something out of EastEnders? If he's a Barrow boy or something, but he sounded like Richard Harris, and I thought, that's got to be an Irish accent then. So I was just completely miffed by it. I felt the whole thing was fake. So when I got home, I started to research more about this Bill Meadows, and I typed in Christmas tree seance, Bill Meadows. And I came up with something that had been published 4 years earlier on the internet, and it was someone's review of a Christmas tree seance. And the whole thing read out script for script exactly how I'd experienced it the night before. It was almost as if the whole thing had to be totally 100% rehearsed like magicians do. When I pull this lever, you ring that bell. When I do that, you do that. And the whole thing was paced like a play. It wasn't spontaneity. And I thought, that's exactly how it read out. And so I thought, right, if I ever got the opportunity to go back there, you have to pay 30 quid, by the way, to go to these things. If I went back there, how could I expose it as a fake? I can't photograph them with cameras. They check you when you go in. They take all your rings off, any cameras or any recording devices, any phones. They all go in a little box. So you go in there rather like airport security. You're stripped of your bits and pieces. I thought, how could I expose it? And I thought, well, I'm an artist. I do paintings and things like that. And they're with oil paints. Now, oil paints take maybe 2 or 3 days to dry. And I thought, I know what I could do. I could sit in the car park before I went into the building, and I could put a little bit of oil paint, red oil paint, on my finger, like that. And then I'd get a little plaster and put it over there, so that when I'm checked and they're up and down checking for phones and things like that, they'll see a plaster, but they wouldn't even consciously acknowledge it. A lot of people have plasters, it's an everyday thing. But hidden under my plaster is oil paint. And if they see a bit of the red, it's just the blood, isn't it? So I'm sitting there, and I would make sure that when it came to the point to go and shake hands with the materialised hand of Jonathan, I'd be the very last person in the queue. Because that way, I was going to go up there, I was going to take my plaster off and rub oil paint all over this materialised hand. And the thing is, you can't wash it off with water because it's oil paint. The only thing you can get it off with, and this is, pardon the pun, white spirit. So in the next room, after the seance is done and everyone's having their digestive biscuits and cups of tea, I'll be walking around the room to see who's got the red hand. And I'll say, caught you, red-handed. So that's one way of doing it, okay? So bear that in mind for any future seances you go to, okay? Now, on with the show here. Got to wait this up. Here we go. I've got to wait There we go. Okay, so this is my part of my family. This is my dad, Brian, and this is my mum, Margaret, and this is my brother, Jason. That's his wife, Claire. This was taken about 4 years ago, and my mum, would you believe it or not, in this photograph is 21 years old. Because that's every year when it's her birthday. I said, how old are you going to be this year, Mum? She goes, 21. So we just had to believe her. But in fact, this is how she looked when she was 21 years old. Yeah. Now, back in 2016, my mum suddenly passed spirit, and I was fortunately there. Now, the weird thing about it, I was actually editing a video at their house. I had a computer upstairs in one of the spare bedrooms, and my mum and dad called me downstairs that evening. They said, would you like to come and watch Time Team on the TV, because it's about the local area here? So I said, yeah, sure. So I took a break from editing, came downstairs, made them a cup of tea, watched Time Team for an hour. Very interesting. I said, do you want another cup of tea? They said, yes, please. So I made them all a cup of tea. And then I went back upstairs to carry on editing. And I was there till about 10:30. My dad shouted up the stairs. He goes, Neil, your mum doesn't feel well, and she wants me to go to bed with her. Now, the routine there was that my mum would normally go to bed at 10:30, and my dad would stay up till about 12 midnight watching war films to see who won the war. You know, I mean, sort of 75 years later, he still didn't know. So I thought that's a bit unusual. My dad going back to bed at the same time my mum, and I always felt like she must have been frightened in some way. And I thought, does she know something? And anyway, she crawled up the stairs feeling really unwell. And when she got to the top of the stairs, the bedroom that I was in was literally at the top of the stairs. So I shouted through the door without actually seeing her. I said, I hope you feel better soon in the morning. Something like, I hope you feel better soon. Nanai. But as I said it, I had a really weird feeling inside of me, like something not good. There's an inner knowing that something was going to happen, but I didn't know what. And of course, during the night, she passed to spirit. My dad was under the impression that she had fainted, but when I took a look at it, I said, she's dead, she's dead. So ambulance was called and everything like that. And that was that, basically. Now, obviously, it was a very upsetting time for everybody. And there's a team of mediums, I say a duo of mediums, called Heavenly Voices down in Poole in Dorset. Now, we had heard of this team because people at hairdressers saying, oh, we had a reading with Heavenly Voices last night. It's so accurate, so accurate. But there's a waiting list to see these people. And they call it a spirit board here. You might call it an Ouija board or something like that, but they prefer to call it a spirit board. And they've been doing this for about 12, 13 years now, where they have been doing this. They're not a husband and wife, they're friends. This lady works with this gentleman's wife. Okay, so that's how they know each other. And it's just that they both have an interest in psychic things and they started to investigate ghosts, and this is how this whole thing came about. So basically, on Facebook one time, nearly about a year to the day that my mum had passed, on their website, a thing came out saying, we've had a cancellation for tonight. We need at least 4 people who wants a last minute sit-in. So my girlfriend's friend rang us up and said, I've managed to get a booking. Do you and Neil want to come? So we went, oh, yeah, okay. So we went along there and I took my little audio recorder. And basically I was like 4th in line, and my mum came through. How else can I say it? The glass here moved and whizzed around the table. And what they normally open the proceedings with, is there anyone here to talk to Neil? And it went, rather than to say yes, it went, hi, son. So I immediately knew that it was my mum. And she spelt out her name, and they said, ask a series of questions that we can test who it is. So they said, what's the month of Neil's birth? December. And they said, what's Neil's middle name? And the glass whizzed round, confused. Now, the thing is, I've got 2 middle names. And this is an interesting point. I think that when there's 2 options, it confuses the glass or the spirit energy in some way. So I said, no, hang on, don't worry about 2 middle names. What's the name of my dad? And then it stopped and correctly spelled out Bryan. That's how my dad spells his name. So then I said, okay, what's the name of the road we lived in? It went Love. And Lisa here says, love. And I said, no, there's one more letter. And then went L, Lovell Road. That was the road that we all grew up in. So because it was such a short minute notice kind of thing, I wasn't really prepared with all the questions, you know. But one thing that was interesting about a week before my mum passed the spirit, my brother, who was living there at the time, he wasn't there on the night she died, but he was living there at the time, and he said he smelt the smoke of our granddad, who was my mum's father. He was a Welshman, and he smelt the tobacco smoke, a very distinct smell of tobacco smoke. And then also he said about 2 weeks prior to her passing, he was asleep in the bedroom, and he said he saw my mum, maybe at about that age, come through the bedroom, holding her dress up, skipping, and it's completely silent. He said it's like a silent movie, skipping with a smile on her face, and she passed by him and just vanished out the window. And this is before she was dead. And we thought, in hindsight, we thought, what's going on? And what I wonder is if her spirit was preparing to depart and it was testing its wings, so to speak, by having astral experiences unconsciously to her. And on the night she passed, because she felt scared, she perhaps unconsciously knew it was going to happen. And that weird feeling that I had somehow got an indication that something again was going to happen, but I didn't quite know what. So I expected, because we had the tobacco smoke of my granddad, that maybe my grandfather had come to collect her to take her to the spirit world. And what had happened is that during this reading, I said to her, have you met Grandad Bob and Granny Bob is what we called them? And she said, yes. And then she spelled out really quickly, my mum came and met me. And I thought, oh, that's a surprise. I was expecting it to be Grandad Bob, not your mum. So I thought, that's interesting. Because people say, oh, it's your subconscious moving it around, things like that. But there's a lot of things coming out that was against my belief system of what I believed to be the case. So she was saying it was her own mother coming through rather than her father. And they do say the spirit world tries to impress upon people when someone's about to pass. They try and give clues to people in the family that might be psychic, which could be, for instance, tobacco smoke of a former relative, or indications like my brother saw her walking through the room. It's like a sign for him type of thing. So maybe that was the case point. So what I'm going to do here now, about a year later, I was given the opportunity to have another reading with Heavenly Voices. And this time I was more prepared and I'd got a whole load of questions. So I got permission from them to film it, and I'll explain the filming setup. They got, this is where they were. It's in their, where is it? It's in their garage. And so it's a garage done out as a small kind of psychic room, if you like. They got their table there. But I couldn't move my camera right round to be parallel with the table because there was a sofa on the left-hand side. So I literally just had to set my camera up. I couldn't put my lights up the way I'd normally want to do all that because there was so much limited space. But it gives a record of what happened. So I'm going to play that for you now, and hopefully it'll fire off and we can see something. Just give it a second. Yeah, let's give it a second. Any further questions?
Yes. Have you personally seen spirit, or the nature, I should say, nature spirits, elementals, clairvoyantly or in physical manifestation?
I'm one of those people, I don't see things, but I do feel things.
But in physical manifestation.
Yeah, I've experimented with channeling or trance in the past, and I have felt the presence of a small mischievous being next to me on one occasion. And also when I had a gentleman once with me, I also felt another small character. And at the time I said, well, this is really weird. This guy, he's very small and he's with you. And I said, I feel he's like a little gnome character. And he says, yeah, that's true. I've been told I've got a gnome that follows me about. And so although I didn't see it, I kind of felt it, and I felt the description. And other times I've given people readings. I gave a person a reading once where it was her father that had come through, and he was showing me mental images of leaks coming through the house onto the floor. And I said, you lived in a house where the rain was leaking through, and I can see buckets on there to catch the raindrops. And she goes, yeah, my dad never fixed the roof. He's always putting buckets there. And then I said, I can now see him jumping around, stamping on mice. And she goes, yeah, we had mice in it, and he's always trying to stamp on the mice in the house. He never put mouse traps out. He was quite a practical man. But But after a while I was chatting, I suddenly felt a kind of, as I was losing my breath, and felt this whole shiver come through me and an absolute coldness. And I said, oh my God, I feel he's just come through me or come through my aura or something. He's really drawn close. So I do feel them. I sometimes feel them up here or feel them up there, mostly onto that side, because I've asked this of other mediums. I said, how do you know if it's not your thoughts coming through or that of a spirit? How do you know? And he says, oh, that's easy. I feel spirit to the right or to the left. My own thoughts are always in the middle. And that's, for those that are mediums out there, maybe you've got experiences similar to that, but you kind of feel they're slightly off kilter, slightly.
Have you seen orbs of light?
No, I've never seen orbs. That's I don't see anything. I don't only feel things.
Because I've seen a physical manifestation of orbs of light. And once outside Covent's Prison, Edinburgh, it was a foot tall. It was a 10-watt luminosity, about 3 metres away, 5 metres away, dancing up and down. It had, couldn't see eyes or nose or teeth, but you could see wings, arms, legs, and a head. And I thought, after several seconds, that's a fairy.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about wings, because some people wonder if the wings are being put on there by the Victorian romanticised idea of them. It's like the idea with angels with wings. And you wonder, was that put on there because people see them levitating or something like that, so they assume they've got to have wings to fly. I think that has been developed by people into butterfly wings and feathered wings and things like that, because that's our interpretation of how birds or insects fly. But I'm actually wondering if what people are mistaken for wings is maybe like with the girl that was the ghost, where she had that energy coming out the back of her head. Maybe they've got an energy that emanates from like an aura, and people say, well, I saw light coming out of them, so there must have been wings, or they're describing it to someone. The guy there in the Heavenly Voices video, Andy, he said that once he was going to give a reading to someone via the board, maybe a week later, a week in the future, and he'd come home with his family, and there was an intruder in his house. He opened the door, and there was an intruder in his house, and he said, stand back, everyone, there's an intruder in the house. But he said he saw this man stand there, and he said he described it like the sparkler man, which Lisa, the girl, always found funny. He said there was what appeared to be sparks coming out of him. And he would just stand there looking at him for a second, and then he vanished. And then through the board, a week later, the man said, sorry I frightened you last week. That was me. And so he actually wanted to check up on him to see if he was an okay person to come through to. Now, Philip Kinsella, a medium friend of mine, said that he was sitting once, he'd come home from work and he sat down in the chair, and he said he was sitting in the conservatory, and he said, coming up the garden path, he said, no one could get in his back garden. So he thought, where's that person come from? Again, people think it's an intruder. He suddenly saw a man he recognised be his friend that died a year previously. But again, he described him with sparks coming out of him.
Years ago, my brother-in-law made a fort for my son, and I thought he was too young for it, so I put it on top of the wardrobe. And in the middle of the night, I woke up and I saw fairies in the fort. I sat up in bed, and they were absolutely fantastic.
Wow.
I could see through them.
Yeah.
But the colours were so pale, but they had wings. They had to do a little, it was absolutely
Amazing.
But that's many years ago.
Fairies in the fort.
Fairies. And I think the love that he put into the fort
Yeah.
had drawn the fairies to the fort.
Well, it's an interesting thing, actually, because there was practice years ago where people would make fairy houses to attract the fairies.
Right.
So it's almost like the fort is a kind of similar idea.
They were going in and out the turrets, and it was lovely.
Oh, they didn't join the Foreign Legion.
Never seen anything since, but that was a marvellous experience.
Oh, thank you. Any more questions?
Sorry,
Richard?
I'm hogging the question.
It's okay.
There was a clip recently. There's probably a few millions of times. I don't know if you've seen it, and it's a dad in the garden with his daughter or something. He's going, "What's that in the tree? What is it in the tree?" And it looks like a kind of stick man with wings, and it kind of flies off. I was wondering if you'd seen that.
I haven't seen that, no.
It's quite a...
What, is it a pretend video, you mean, a special effects thing or
No,
something?
no, it just seems like he's out in the garden with his camera phone. They're doing like quite a few things, and they're looking at something in the tree going, what's that? What's that? And sure enough, it comes off the tree, and it's this humanoid figure with kind of fluttering wings, and it goes off. Did someone else see the TV? Thank God for that.
Interesting.
I think you are seeing things, Rich.
Interesting. There's fairies associated with trees. Years ago, I did some artwork for a chap who was writing a book about the trees, and we went for a little walk through the woods, and he was telling me about the different trees, because I don't really know much about trees. I do like the oak tree, but that's all I know, and a willow tree, and that's about my limit, really. And he told me, because he's into trees, he goes on these little kind of workshops and courses and things, and on one of these workshops, he met a Canadian chap who he chatted to out throughout the day. And this Canadian guy said that he had this favourite tree that he'd go and sit and meditate by every single day. And he loved this tree. It was his favourite tree. And he'd sit there and meditate every day. And then he'd go off to do work or whatever he had to do. And then one day he'd meditated by the tree. Then he went off to work. And he was at work doing stuff. And he suddenly felt an urge, a pull. I've got to go back to my tree. And he had to literally said, I'm sorry to the boss. I've got to go. I've got to go. Didn't explain why. And he went off. And he came back to his tree. And it had been cut down. And he thought, oh no, my tree's been cut down. And then he said suddenly, where the tree stump was, he saw this light, luminous energy above the tree, and it sort of telepathically communicated with him. He said, thank you for coming back. I called you back because I wanted to say goodbye. And it was like the energy of the tree. And some people call them dryads, which are spirit trees and things like that. But this energy had come back to say, thank you for being my friend type of thing. I've now got to go. Which is a very interesting story. And he said this guy was a regular sort of guy. He was not like a hippie. He was just a normal guy. And he had a love of trees. And this was obviously manifested when he saw that spirit being. And Native American Indians have obviously believed in that sort of thing. I think in Pocahontas, there's a scene in there where they see this spirit in the tree. So they're kind of reflecting that idea.
I believe that because I've got my own tree that I meditate to. And I've seen things in the third eye meditation.
I believe that they have an energy, and I did read years ago in a channel book that says that trees will be aware of individuals as they pass them by, and they'll recognise each person's energy. So for instance, if you walk past a tree every day to work or whatever, it'll start to recognise your particular energy out of that from everybody else. And it's like, oh, here comes Fred or whoever it may be. And so this is why I think that spirit of the tree recognised that bloke and literally bonded with him in some way. Maureen?
Have you got a view on what the councils are doing to the trees lately, chopping them down for the 5G?
Well, I think chopping down any trees, apart from if it's going to fall on your house or something, you know, just for a telephone network, it's absolutely diabolical, to be honest. Yeah. And I think it's murder, really, in a way, isn't it? Murder of trees. And the fact that people could talk about that now shows how far we've come in 30 years or something. Because we're all quite happy 30 years ago sawing up wood for fire and things like that. Now we don't need firewood. We're kind of becoming aware that, hey, actually, this is just like an animal here or something, but it's just not a moving animal. And the fact that people are communicating with them now, again, we're recognising them. They're part of the planet, living. They may move at a different frame rate than us, but there's people there that are moving at a quicker frame rate than us that we can't see. And we're all trying to co-inhabit this planet. And the conclusion I would say it's not a conclusion, but my guess now is that we are a physical world, but it's like we've got different frequencies operating, and obviously 5G is a frequency of some sort. But it's like there's so many different frequencies, we can only see like 8% of the spectrums, I'm told. So beyond those spectrums, there's all sorts of things that are affecting us and things that we can't see. And I believe that maybe fairies, if we call them fairies, are operating at a slightly different spectrum. And then the spirit world is even further up the spectrum somewhere. And I've been in communication with a guy in Australia who's developing something called, well, he calls it a telephone for want of a better word, but it's like a communication device with the spirit world. And he said he's actually talked to his father through it. He called out, son, I'm here, it's your dad sort of thing. I love you, son, and stuff like that. And he said he's got a spirit team helping him develop it. Now in America, and you can find this on YouTube, and I really wish I could remember the name of the researcher, but there's a chap that, again, one day he was coming through his house, and he's a researcher into ITC, which is interdimensional transcommunication. And basically that's like communicating with the spirit world through electronic gadgets, computers, radios, telephones, that sort of thing. And he said his phone rang once, so he picked it up, and there's a voice, a European accent. Hello. He goes, hello? He goes, this is Konstantin Radovich. Now, Konstantin Radovich was a researcher into the same thing when he was alive on Earth, and he had died. But here he was ringing up a present-day researcher into the same phenomena to tell him about his life in the spirit world and to say, you know, maybe procedures that he could do to improve his communication with the spirit world. And this guy's totally taken aback, and he said, if you ring again, can I record you? And he goes, yes, of course. You know, say, okay, thanks. Now, the spirits, importantly, they always ring after 6 because it's cheaper. So he did ring again, but this time he had his recorder set up ready, and he's actually recorded it, and you can actually hear it on YouTube. So if you type spirit talking through telephone, you might get it, or if you can remember the name Konstantin Radovich, I can't even remember how to spell it, and he actually talks, and he's coming through, and he's telling him what frequency adjustments he could do for his little radios that communicate with the spirit world. And he said, there's someone here that wants to speak to you. And he said, it's a bishop. And this bishop apparently had died 200 years previously. And he says, I will now, in his accent, I will now pass him the device. So he's talking about some sort of device that they've got in the spirit world, presumably like a radio or telephone. He just calls it a device. And he said, you can hear a crackle. And then this other voice then comes on this device and starts speaking to him. And he's a bishop or something from 200 years earlier. And it's quite an amazing thing to hear. Now, skeptics go, oh, that's some bloke putting on a funny voice and things like that. But I said, well, okay, skeptics, you're absolutely right. It could be a bloke putting on a funny voice. But tell me, there's no such thing as mediumship, is there? And they say, no, there's no such thing as mediumship. I said, and you've obviously proven that because you've obviously been to loads of psychic circles and demonstrations. And they say, no. So how can they say that? I mean, I remember once working on a night shift at a TV station with a guy. And I said, do you believe in life after death? And he goes, no. And I said, why is that? He says, well, there's just not enough evidence. And I said, and how much of the evidence have you looked into? And he went, nothing. So I said, well, how can you say there's nothing when you haven't looked for it? And John Cleese is on the internet now. There's a seminar that he hosted in America about a year ago. And it's Is There Life After Death? And it's with John Cleese. You can find it on YouTube. And he's talking to these American psychologists and researchers. And there's about 8 of them across this stage talking about their different research into reincarnation and near-death experiences and things like that. And these are top-notch kind of scientific people now researching into it. And John Cleese pretty much said the same thing. He said, you know, it's no good all these skeptics saying there's not enough evidence. He says you can look for the evidence and you will absolutely find tons of it out there if you look for it. It's the people that just want to read the Sun newspaper, watch Jeremy Kyle. Now it's not on air, sad to say, but whatever it is, you know, watching all the TV. Yeah. But they're just, you know, watching junk on the TV, but they're not really paying attention to this kind of stuff. No, it's up to them. No one's going to force them to look for it. But I think it's no good saying there's not enough evidence when they're not even prepared to try and go down the library and see if there's a book on it. Anything like that. It's just a silly statement to make.
Robbie Williams has just said that he spoke the spirit for years.
I know he's into UFOs. I didn't know he's into life after death, but that's interesting.
It's just this last week he's made a statement.
Interesting.
Yeah. Is it like walking through a door? Is that what it is? You're knocking on the door with those Ouija boards. Is that what it is?
What, when you're communicating on a Ouija board?
Because I was always led to believe that Ouija boards weren't exactly the right thing to do.
Well, this is how the Christians, anyway. Mostly the people that tell you that, I think they've got misinformed ideas, and also I think there's a threat. Have you ever noticed, for instance, if you go back to maybe 20, 30 years ago, you might have had Stars on Sunday on TV, or on a Sunday morning they'd have a church service on the TV, and today's service is from the such and such church of da-da-da-da with the right reverend blah blah blah, and it's 2 hours of boredom talking about church stuff. And yet as soon as you had a medium on the TV like Doris Stokes or Tony Stockwell, they'd have a little notice that says this is for entertainment purposes only, you should not take it seriously, nothing should be construed from this sort of thing. And they had to put it on there by some sort of regulation of broadcasting. But they never had to put that kind of thing there when they put the church services out there, did they? They never said, oh, by the way, we haven't really looked into the Bible, proof God or Jesus or anything like that. Nothing could be construed by a man walking on the water. You know, don't go and place your bets. They just did the whole thing, and you had to accept it. And I thought that was a bit of a one-sided type of thing. You know, I don't mind something being put up there, but I think they should put it out there with the church services as well. And so I get this idea that they don't really want us to know there's a life after death. And it's the same thing. They don't really want us to know anything about UFOs. They don't want us to know anything about fairies and things. And so I think there's a bit of a conspiracy, if we can use that word, to prevent us from knowing about the wider spirit world around us. For instance, if they said on the 6 o'clock news tonight, it's been proved, there's life after death, we've got the evidence, and they play you videotapes, they play you audio things of all these people, then you could have people like Princess Diana coming through one of these telephones that says, yeah, I was murdered, or JFK saying, oh yeah, it was so-and-so that killed me. And that opens up a lot of can of worms that people don't want to open up. And so I think if they can stamp on it and suppress it, then it keeps the order a little bit. I mean, that guy that was killed in the run-up to the Iraq War, Dr. David Kelly, mysteriously committed suicide. He could come through and say, yes, I did commit suicide, or no, I was actually murdered. Robin Cook is another. So all these people that have been bumped off could theoretically come through this channel of communication. So this is why we're being told not to look at it. You see, in the same way the church doesn't want us to look at it because it takes away the money that's going into their coffers. Oh God, everyone's at once now.
Apparently Argos is selling as a Christmas toy. I was told about this years and years ago. They were selling Ouija boards.
Really?
Christmas, yeah. But then other people said you shouldn't do that because it can bring in bad entities and getting kids doing it and that kind of thing.
I think it's got to be used responsibility. It's a bit like the internet. You know, we can all go on the internet and chat to a complete stranger.
Yeah.
And we don't know much about them, but you would kind of get a feel, is this an idiot I'm talking to, or is it a nice person? And it's the same way in the old days, we all had CB radio, maybe, you know, and you'd go on the one...
Tuning in to that radio.
Yeah, you go 1-9 for a copy and you get a nice person or you get an idiot. And sometimes you might be speaking to someone you know down the road and you know it's your friend. Or there's a complete and utter idiot on the, oh, no, whatever. And they're just giving you a load of bull.
So what do you do with the glass afterwards? It's just stuff I've picked up over the years.
I would give it a nice wash and put it away for the next session.
Yeah, it's not as if it's...
In Germany, they have a very strange belief. After an Ouija board session, I know this because my friend's wife was German. And she said in Germany, after an Ouija board session, you'd have to open the windows to let the spirit out.
Yeah.
They never mentioned about opening the windows to let them in. Maureen, you had a question.
Do you want to tell everybody how you were kicked off the alpaca?
Oh, okay. All right. Well, because of my beliefs, my research and things like that, ever since I was young, I mean, I used to watch Doris Stokes on the TV and stuff like that. And as a youngster, I'd be like 10 years old and I'd say to Mum, where was I before I was born? And she said, you didn't exist. I thought, well, I must exist. And so that set me on the pathway to researching where was I before I was born. So that's how I got into this whole thing. I'd find articles on the Reader's Digest about someone having an out-of-body experience perhaps, or a near-death experience as they're called. And then I'd seen mediums like Doris Stokes on the TV doing demonstrations and things like that. And so obviously as I got older, I started working. I actually started to go and see these mediums at spiritualist churches. And one day I was coming out of Woolworths, which we used to have back then, and I just bought a record for £5 and I put 50 pence in a Save the Children tin of this lady collecting outside Woolworths, and there's a couple of other ladies standing nearby. I mistakenly thought these were all connected, these people, because they're all standing next to each other, but they weren't. These two other ladies were standing there with a clipboard, and they said, do you mind if we ask you a few questions? And I said, well, yeah, sure, what's the matter? And they said, could you tell us, do you attend church? And I went, no, I don't. And they said, do you believe in God? And I said, well, not quite the way maybe, church people would. And they said, do you have any religion? I said, well, I'm not really religious, but if you've got to tick a box that says religion, you can put me down as a spiritualist, but I wouldn't really say I'm a spiritualist, but it's the nearest thing that I can give you to religion if you want something like that. And I explained about my interest in mediumships and things like that. And I said, so I said, what's all this for then? She goes, well, we're from the Gold Hill Baptist Church. And we're doing a survey to try and find out why young people, I think I was 19 then, why young people are not attending church. And I said, oh, right, okay. So I said, what's going to happen to me when I die? And they said, oh, you're going to go to hell. I said, really? I said, why is that? He says, well, because you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your saviour. I said, so hang on, you said you can't attract people into your church, so you're trying to do a survey to find out why. So I could turn the table and say, well, the reason I'm going to hell is that you failed to attract me into the church, and so therefore it's your fault I'm going to hell, because your advertising isn't good enough. Oh, no. So anyway, that set me on a bit of a kind of truth campaign, trying to research more into the Bible and things like that. I did read various books that would maybe pick out holes in the Bible and odds and ends with it and things like that. And so that when I did meet people like Jehovah's Witnesses at the door, I would throw them questions like, for instance, they'd knock at the door, hello, we come to talk to you about Jesus. And, oh, yeah, okay. So I'd say, well, can I ask a question? And they'd say, yeah. Can you tell me about Genesis? In Genesis, do you accept a day as a day, or do you accept a day in creation as 1,000 years? And I think they like to think they're a bit on the evolutionary thing. So they say, a day is 1,000 years. Oh, that's good. So we go with that idea. And so I said, okay, on the third day then, God created the flora and the fauna, which is the plants. They say, yeah, that's right. So you've got all the trees, all the plants on the earth. And then on the fifth day, which is 2,000 years later, they go, yeah. 2,000 years later, he then created the sun and the moon in the sky. So I said, how does the plant survive for 2,000 years without photosynthesis? And they go, it's dust in the sky blocking out the sun. I said, what do you mean dust in the sky blocking out the sun? The sun hasn't been invented yet. It's 2,000 years later the sun comes along. And the bloke's going, oh, I'll stick to the scriptures, thank you. I'll stick to the scriptures. And so they say, well, we'll go and ask someone. We'll go and ask someone, so we'll come back with an answer. And each Jehovah's Witness that's come, I've asked them the same question. They say, oh, we'll come back with an answer. And they never come back. They never come back. So anyway, again, I'm sort of sharpening up my kind of psychological knives a little bit and really drawing the battle lines now. And I see these things called Alpha Course. It says, come and find out about Jesus. So I think, right you are, I will. And I've read a lot more stuff by this time. And this time I ring them up and I say, look, I'm interested. And I tell you where I am. I am into mediumship and this sort of stuff. Now, I just want to see if I've missed something. You know, if I've missed something, fair enough. Now, maybe you can explain it, but I just don't fully understand it. Can I come along? And they said, yes, yes. So I went and met this guy for coffee, first of all, in a Costa Coffee. And I recognised him as the guy that I actually saw in the gym. And I thought, oh, yeah, he's a familiar face. So we sat down there, we had a coffee and a chat. And I told him a bit about my understanding of the Bible. And he says, oh, you obviously understand quite a lot. And I said, well, I have read quite a lot about the Bible. And he says, well, to be honest, the ones that we've suddenly got in the course, which we're about to start, he says, they're not the sharpest knives in the drawer. And so when I actually got there, I thought, God, these people aren't even in the bloody drawer. So there was a girl there that she said she prayed to God and it helped her pass her driving test. And I said, well, look, I passed my driving test first time. I never had to pray to anybody. When I passed, I said, thank the Lord. So what happened was they would say certain things and I would say, well, what about this? What about that? And one of the questions I said to them, I said, can you tell me, is heaven perfect? And they said, yes, heaven's perfect. Absolutely perfect. It's really perfect in heaven. So I said, well, okay, if it's perfect, how come God had an argument with the devil and he threw him out of heaven? Because if heaven's perfect, he wouldn't have had that argument with him and thrown him out, would he? And the bloke sort of had to backtrack a bit. And he goes, okay, well, it's not quite perfect, but it's very close to perfect. I went, oh. Now, the young girl that said she prayed to Jesus, who then helped her pass her driving test, she brought her boyfriend who wasn't quite convinced of the whole thing. So he'd listened to what I'd say and he said to me, I like you coming here. I said, do you? He says, yeah. He says, because every time they say something, you say something opposite and it gets me thinking a bit. And I kind of like what you're saying. I went, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, by about week 7, I got a phone call. Hello, is that Neil? Yeah. Oh, hi, it's Rob from the Alpha Course. I wonder if you mind not coming in tomorrow. Oh, why is that? Well, we just think it'd be better without you. So I was thrown off the Alpha Course because I was asking too many difficult questions, you see. So there we go, that's the Alpha Course. I've been on 2 of them and none of them convinced me. And of course, they all think this is a load of rubbish, you see. Oh, yeah.
Going back to what you were saying earlier about how people being locked up on that. There's a lady called Amanda Ellis, you'll find her on YouTube, some of you might know her, and she's interviewed Princess Diana about 3 times to my knowledge, also Michael Jackson, that's an interesting story as well, and Prince, and I just recommend that you go and check her out.
So does she channel them or?
She's not a trans channel, they speak to her and she speaks.
I see. I might have seen her videos actually. Does she speak to a lady who lost her son? who I might be thinking of a different person then. Yeah.
This question was
You're thinking of Eric's mum.
That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, similar kind of thing, I think, by the sound of it. Right, I think, am I really done here? Yeah, I think we're about done now. So
It just leaves me
thank
to
you very much.
present you.
Oh my goodness. I've seen this, so I know what to prepare.
Neil Geddes.
Royal. The royal seal of approval. Now,
And a truth seeker pen.
oh, a True Seeker's pen. Thank you. I'll have to wear it like my son does, because he wears a hat like that, you know, so I have to stick with him on that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Bless you. Thank you.
I've had a brilliant day today.
Thank you.